The great hall of Thornwood Castle had never been so silent. Hundreds of wolves stood shoulder to shoulder, their breath held, their eyes fixed on the two figures at the center of the stone floor. Elena Voss stood in her ceremonial white dress, her hands trembling at her sides, waiting for the words that would bind her forever to the strongest wolf in the kingdom. Alpha King Damian Ashgrove looked at her, and for one heartbeat, something warm passed between them. The mate bond had just been confirmed. Every wolf in the room had felt it, a shift in the air, a pull that could not be denied. Elena was his true mate. She could see it in his eyes before he looked away. Then his jaw tightened, his shoulders straightened, and he said the words that would break her. "I reject you as my mate." The hall gasped. Elena felt the words strike her like claws tearing through skin. Pain shot through her chest, sharp and burning, the unmistakable agony of a rejected bond. She did not cry out, she would not give him the satisfaction, but her knees nearly buckled, and only pride kept her standing. "The council has spoken," Damian said, his voice steady, even as his own body betrayed him with a flicker of pain no one else seemed to notice. "Thornwood needs an alliance with House Calderon. I will marry Serafina Calderon before the season ends." Elena said nothing. She simply turned and walked out of the hall, her spine straight, her head high, while whispers followed her like a cold wind. That night, she left Thornwood territory forever. She traveled for 3 days without stopping, crossing into the neighboring kingdom of Ravenmoor, where no one knew her name or her shame. She took a small room above a healer's shop and told the old woman who owned it that her name was Elena Marsh. She never spoke of Thornwood again. The pain of the rejection did not fade the way she had been told it might. It settled into her bones, a quiet ache that flared whenever she was tired or afraid. Her wolf senses, once sharp enough to hear a heartbeat across a room, grew duller. She had lost part of herself the moment Damian spoke those words, and she was not sure she would ever get it back. But Elena refused to be broken. She worked in the healer's shop by day and trained with the local guard by night, pouring her grief into her body until her muscles ached instead of her heart. Within a year, she had earned a place among Ravenmoor's warriors. Within 3, she had risen to lead them. She became known as a woman who never lost a fight and never spoke about her past. The pack called her Commander Marsh, and she let them. Back in Thornwood, Damian's marriage to Serafina Calderon was celebrated as a triumph of politics. The alliance strengthened the kingdom's borders and filled its treasury with new trade routes. On paper, it was everything the council had wanted. In reality, the marriage was cold from the very first night. Serafina was clever and beautiful, but her ambitions belonged to her family, not to Damian. She spent her days writing letters to her father, arranging trade deals that benefited House Calderon far more than Thornwood, and her nights in a separate wing of the castle. She and Damian rarely spoke unless it was required for appearances. There was no warmth between them, no laughter, nothing that resembled the life a mate bond might have given him, and the bond he had rejected did not let him forget what he had lost. At first, it was small things, a dull headache that came and went, a strange weakness in his left arm during training. He told himself it was stress, the burden of ruling a kingdom still recovering from years of border conflict. But as months turned into years, the symptoms grew worse. He began losing his breath during patrols. His wolf, once powerful enough to command an entire pack with a single howl, grew sluggish and quiet, as though something vital had been cut away from it. The council physician had a name for it, though he spoke it only in private: bond sickness. A slow decay of body and spirit that came from rejecting a true mate and never healing the wound. There was no cure, the physician said, except one thing that Damian refused to consider: finding Elena and somehow repairing what he had broken. Damian told himself he did not need her. He had a kingdom to run, a wife to manage, alliances to maintain, but at night, alone in his chambers, he would press a hand to his chest and feel the hollow place where the bond should have been, and he would remember the look on Elena's face in the moment before she turned away from him forever. 5 years passed this way. Thornwood grew stronger on the outside, while its king grew weaker within. Whispers began to spread among the pack elders that the Alpha King's strength was fading, though none dared say why in front of him. The crisis that changed everything began at the northern border. A group of rogue wolves, displaced by conflicts in a distant territory, had begun raiding villages along the line between Thornwood and Ravenmoor. Neither kingdom could handle the threat alone, and for the first time in a decade, the two territories were forced to send envoys to discuss a joint defense. Damien did not expect to attend the meeting himself. His health had grown too fragile for long journeys, and his advisors urged him to send a representative instead. But something pulled at him, a feeling he could not explain, and he insisted on traveling to Ravenmoor personally. He told himself it was duty. He did not let himself hope it was anything else. The meeting hall in Ravenmoor was smaller than Thornwood's, practical rather than grand, filled with maps and reports rather than banners and gold. Damien sat at the head of the Thornwood delegation, doing his best to hide the tremor in his hands, when the doors opened and the Ravenmoor Alpha entered with his commanders. Damien's heart stopped. Elena stood at the Alpha's right hand, dressed in the dark leather of a warrior commander, a scar along her jaw that had not been there 5 years ago. Her eyes swept over the room and landed on him, and for a moment, neither of them moved. She had changed. Her posture was different, stronger, harder. But the moment their eyes met, the bond flared back to painful, undeniable life in Damien's chest, so intense that he had to grip the edge of the table to keep from gasping aloud. Elena felt it too. He saw it in the way her breath caught, the way her hand tightened briefly at her side before she forced herself to remain still. "Commander Marsh," the Ravenmoor Alpha said, gesturing toward her, "will be leading our forces in this operation." Damien barely heard the rest of the meeting. He watched Elena speak with calm authority about troop positions and supply lines, watched the way the other commanders listened to her without question, and felt a strange mixture of pride and grief twist together in his chest. She had built this life without him. She had become someone powerful and respected, and he had played no part in it. When the meeting ended, he found an excuse to linger, and when the others had filed out, he approached her. "Elena," he said quietly. "It's Commander Marsh," she replied, not looking at him. "Please," he said. 5 minutes. She studied him for a long moment, taking in the paleness of his skin, the way his hand still rested against the table as though he needed it for balance. Whatever she saw made her expression flicker, just slightly, before she nodded and led him to a private room. "You look unwell," she said once the door was closed, her voice carefully flat. "I am," Damien admitted. "The physicians call it bond sickness. It has been getting worse for years." Elena's jaw tightened. "And you expect my sympathy?" "No," he said. "I expect nothing from you. I only wanted you to know the truth, since you deserve to know what your rejection cost me, even if it was a cost I earned." She turned away from him, walking toward the narrow window that looked out over the training yards below. "You rejected me in front of hundreds of people, Damien. You didn't whisper it privately. You made a spectacle of it. I know. You let me walk out of that hall alone. You never came after me, not once, in 5 years. I told myself I didn't have the right," he said. "After what I did to you, I thought reaching out would only hurt you more. And now? Now I am dying by inches, and I would rather spend whatever time I have left telling you the truth than continue pretending I don't care what happened to you." Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, though still guarded. "My mother used to say that a wolf who abandons his mate abandons a piece of his own soul. I thought it was just an old saying. I didn't understand until it happened to me. I was afraid," Damien admitted. "The council threatened to fracture the kingdom if I didn't marry Serafina. I told myself the pack mattered more than my own happiness. I was wrong to believe that meant it had to be at your expense." "You still made that choice," Elena said. "Not the council. You." "I know," he said again, quieter this time. "And I have regretted it every day since." Over the following weeks, as the joint forces of Thornwood and Ravenmoor worked to push back the rogue wolves along the border, Damien and Elena were forced into each other's company more often than either expected. He watched her lead her warriors with a calm confidence that made him proud and ashamed in equal measure. She watched him struggle through each day, his strength failing even as he refused to step back from his duties. Slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Not about the bond, not at first, but about small things, the border conflict, their strategies, the villages they were trying to protect. Elena found herself surprised by how much Damien had changed, how the arrogance she remembered from the ceremony had been worn away by years of guilt and consequence. Damien, in turn, saw a woman who had rebuilt herself entirely without his help, who did not need him to survive, and the sight of her strength made him admire her more than he ever had on the day they were meant to be joined. It was Serafina who forced the final turn of events. Word reached Thornwood that she had been secretly negotiating with House Calderon to weaken the kingdom's northern defenses in exchange for private trade advantages for her family, a betrayal that put both Thornwood and Ravenmoor at greater risk from the rogue attacks. When the evidence was presented to the council, Serafina's marriage to Damien was dissolved swiftly, the political alliance it had been built upon no longer serving any purpose. Damien felt no sorrow at the marriage's end, only a quiet relief, and a fear that it had come too late for anything to be repaired with Elena. He found her on the training grounds one evening, alone, practicing forms in the fading light. He did not interrupt at first, simply watching the disciplined strength in her movements, the woman she had become. "The marriage is over," he said when she finally noticed him. "I heard," Elena replied, lowering her weapon. "I'm sorry it happened the way it did." "I'm not," Damien said. "I should never have entered it in the first place. I know I cannot undo what I did to you. I know 5 years of silence cannot be erased with an apology, but I am asking you, not as a king, not as an alpha, but as the man who has loved you since the moment we stood in that hall together, for a chance to earn back what I threw away." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing 5 years of pain against the man standing in front of her now, humbled and changed in ways she had not expected. "I am not the same woman who stood in that hall," she said finally. "I will not simply return to being your Luna because you have decided you regret your choice. I don't expect you to," Damien said. "I only ask for time, however long it takes." Elena considered him a moment longer, then gave a small, careful nod. "Time," she agreed, "nothing more, for now." It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, and for the first time in 5 years, the ache in Damien's chest eased, just slightly, as though the bond itself understood that healing, however slow, had finally started. In the months that followed, Damien returned to Ravenmoor often, not as a king seeking favor, but simply as a man willing to listen, to wait, and to prove through patient, steady actions that he had truly changed. Elena never rushed her trust, and Damien never asked her to. Slowly, the distance between them began to close, not through grand gestures, but through small moments of honesty, rebuilt one conversation at a time. Whether the bond between them would ever be fully restored, neither of them could say for certain. But for the first time since the night of the rejection, both of them believed it might be possible, and that belief, fragile as it was, felt like more than either had dared hope for in a very long time.